Welcome back to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. We are your hosts, Jack Stern and Spencer Michaelis, joining you every week from Brewer Fanatic to recap all things Brewers. We got a tale of two series for you this week. The Brewers going on the road, losing a frustrating series in Washington, continuing just the struggles that they have had over the last month or so, but then flipping the script in Atlanta with a really authoritative showing. So we're going to dive right into that in a few seconds. But first of all, Spencer, how are you doing tonight?
Doing well, especially coming off of this Brave series. That was enjoyable. I had a lot of fun watching it. Otherwise, I'm less busy than I had been for the last month before this, so I'm feeling good about that. This was a more relaxing week than I had for a while, so that's been good. And yeah, I'm excited to get into this. But how are you, Jack?
I'm doing swell. Got to watch some good baseball these last couple days. So if you have a less busy week that you're coming off of, this should mean that you're just going to be a rejuvenated ball of energy for this episode, right? Just ready to dive into anything and everything, full of enthusiasm.
Yeah, I mean, we almost went 2 hours last time. I'm thinking 3, maybe 4 today.
Oh, good. Yeah. All of the handful of people, I say handful, but in reality it was like two. The two or so people who told us that they don't mind the longer form podcasts are really going to regret those words when we inevitably do have a 3-hour episode, but I'm kind of hoping that won't be this week. So we'll jump right into this to avoid wasting any more time. We'll start with that series in Washington against the Nationals. The Brewers dropping this one 2 games out of 3. They would win the first one by a score of 8-3. And this is kind of where you thought, okay, maybe the Brewers are getting back on track a little bit, a better showing for the offense in this one. Rhys Hoskins and Garrett Mitchell doubled in the second inning as part of a 3-run frame, a good start for Milwaukee. Washington, however, tying it off of Frankie Montas, who was making his first start as a Brewer since being acquired in that deadline deal. They tied it off of him in the middle innings. CJ Abrams hitting a 2-run home run in the third inning, and then Ildemaro Vargas singled off of him in the fourth to tie it up. He would go 5 innings, 9 hits, 3 earned runs, 5 strikeouts. That was the line for Montas in this one. Saw some interesting flashes with the velocity. He touched 99 at one point in this game, but a lot of hits against him. Kind of had to labor a little bit through this one. The 5 strikeouts are nice, but again, the 9 hits, the 3 runs. I think that this is just kind of a fair expectation for what we'll see in most Frankie Montas starts. And we'll get to his second one of the week in Atlanta. It was kind of the same thing, just a 4 to 5 inning, 3-run. I wouldn't call it a good start, but it's innings, and it's innings that kept the Brewers in the game, and I think that's really all that you can hope for from Frankie Montas this year. Spencer, is there anything that stood out to you in his first start, or can we just kind of keep rolling along here as we recap this game?
No, I mean the velo was definitely nice to see. That was the one thing that stood out. I do think that gives him a little bit more of a ceiling than I would have thought coming in if he can live a little bit higher with the velo, but otherwise mostly what we were expecting, I think.
The Brewers pulling away in this one as the game went on. We mentioned Washington tied it off of Montas in the middle innings, but the Brewers coming back with a 2-run sixth inning. Blake Perkins hitting an RBI single in this one. He would come in off the bench as part of this sequence, replacing Garrett Mitchell against the left-handed pitcher. He would go 2 for 2 off the bench, sliding into that center field spot in the lineup. He had a really nice road trip. We'll talk more about what he did, especially in Atlanta, as we continue moving forward here. William Contreras hitting a solo home run in the seventh. He had a very quietly nice month of July, and now he's off to a really hot start in the month of August here. So pretty big deal that the Brewers are hopefully getting that bat back to form. I don't think it's a coincidence as we go along here that the Brewers had some pretty high run outputs when Contreras was going well on this road trip. There's kind of an element of just when your veterans go, that makes a big difference for your lineup. He wasn't the only guy contributing this week, though. Bryce Terang in the 8th inning hitting a sac fly, and then Jackson Chourio singling, so another 2-run frame for the Brewers. As I mentioned before, they would win this one by a score of 8-3. Game 2, this is where things started to turn south again. Washington winning this one by a score of 6-4. Aaron Savali getting the start in this one. He would give up 4 of his 5 runs allowed in the first inning, and this was a frustrating inning to watch because I do think a lot of it just came back to what we've talked about before with how William Contreras likes to call a game. Matt Trueblood wrote a piece about this shortly after we kind of talked about it a little bit on the podcast, just talking about how he is one of the more fastball heavy game callers in baseball. And part of that is a product of the guys he's catching, guys like
Yep.
Colin Ray, Bryce Wilson, even Tobias Myers, because he's also got the cutter. These are guys who are going to be throwing a lot of fastballs, and they should be throwing a lot of fastballs, mixing the different kinds of fastballs they have. Savali falls into that camp a little bit because he also has that three fastball mix that the Brewers like. So the sinker, the four seamer, and the cutter. But Aaron Savali's two best pitches, and this is what makes him different than Colin Ray or Bryce Wilson, is he has legitimately plus breaking stuff. Ton of movement. These are pitches that have been really effective for him in the past. He's got the sweeper and that curveball. William Contreras just did not want to go to the breaking stuff, especially as this inning progressed. And on the whole, he's been a guy who, Matt wrote about this, after throwing an off-speed pitch or a breaking ball, he doesn't like to double up on it. He'll go right back to the fastball, and then also just in general calling a lot of fastballs. It came back to bite in this inning. So we'll kind of break down the sequence here. I do think there's a reason why they were shying away from it. So I can understand what the thinking is. I think that we just both disagree with the thinking. So the way that this started was early in the inning, Luis Garcia doubled on a curveball that Savali left over the plate. It was a bad pitch. Then Keibert Ruiz would get a curveball that I thought was pretty well located. It was on the corner, and he just kind of shot a soft single, which it's a good pitch, and he didn't really barrel the ball, so I wouldn't read too much into that. But basically, after these two breaking balls that went for hits, after that, they were pretty much done with it. They did not want to throw it the rest of the way. So it meant that Aaron Savali was getting ahead in counts to 2 strikes and then just throwing more fastballs, and they were hitting the fastballs. Aaron Savali, like I mentioned a couple minutes ago, he's like Colin Ray and like Bryce Wilson in that he's got 3 different kinds of fastballs, but none of those fastballs are especially good. In his heyday, the cutter was a pretty valuable pitch, but overall, none of those fastballs profile as great fastballs, velocity-wise, shape-wise, whatever. The whole deal for him needs to be you can get ahead, but once you get ahead, you gotta start hammering guys with breaking stuff because that's how he's gonna get his outs. That's how he's gonna put guys away. So on the whole, it needs to be a very, very balanced mix because that's what's gonna help keep guys off of everything. But the breaking stuff is his bread and butter. So when he's in a count where he can really utilize it, he needs to utilize it to put guys away, and they just didn't in this inning. Savali threw 34 pitches in the first inning. Just 7 of them were breaking balls, but more jarringly, he threw 12 pitches in 2 strike counts. 3 of them were breaking balls. A 2-strike count, that's when you should be throwing the breaking ball because that's where you have the opportunity to, if you locate it well, get a chase, put a guy away. And I do think it is also relevant that Savali in general has not commanded the ball well since he came to the Brewers, and he did make a mistake on that first curveball. But still, man, like you got to be willing to trust him more than this because just going after guys with mediocre fastballs when you're in a 2-strike count, it's not going to work. And it didn't work in this inning.
No, that might be the most confusing part to me is that it clearly wasn't working to just go fastball heavy. Like they kept getting hits and they were hitting the ball pretty hard. So, we didn't even mention, but he struck out the first batter of the game on a curveball
He
too.
did,
So
yes.
he had shown that he could throw it where he needed to at times in order to get a swing and miss to get that third strike that he just wasn't getting against all these guys. And yeah, 7 of 34 for a guy like Savali, just unless you're up maybe like, 10 runs, like maybe later in the road trip, and you're just trying to go after guys and get that should not be happening ever for him in an inning where he's clearly struggling a little bit. You need to go to his best pitches. And yes, the command of those weren't great either, but they need to be involved more than 7 out of 34 times. And like you said, it felt like I don't know for sure that this was fully William calling the game. You pointed this out to me, and I was watching it after. Savali did seem to be messing around on his belt, and it might have been for the PitchCom device. He might have been calling some of these pitches, so we should note that that's a possibility. I'm not 100% sure, but it is a possibility. either way, the combo of those two need to know better than what they did in that first inning. I mean, that's just not smart pitching under any circumstances. I don't care really, honestly, who it is. If the fastballs keep getting hit, you can't just keep throwing them. It's not a good idea for anyone. So that was frustrating. I do think, like you said, Savali's command just it has to be better than it's been so far as a Brewer, or no matter what you're calling, there's going to be some issues. But you need to help him a little bit more than they did with the pitch calling, and that just won't fly. He's going to struggle if they continue to do stuff like that.
Final line for Savali in this one: 4 innings, 7 hits, 5 earned runs, a walk, 3 strikeouts, and then that home run by Garcia that came in the 3rd inning for the Nationals' final run against him on the afternoon. Not a whole lot going on for the Brewers offensively. They did score 4, but if you kind of look at this inning by inning, it was a quiet day for them most of the afternoon. Rhys Hoskins did hit a solo home run in the 7th inning, and then they tacked on a couple in the 8th on a wild pitch by Kyle Finnegan and then a Gary Sanchez base hit to bring it a little bit closer, but this never really felt like a close game that the Brewers were in, so to speak, and they do end up dropping this one by a couple of runs. Game 3, this one was closer, and this is one that it does feel like the Brewers should have had, but they did not end up with. Washington winning this one 4-3. Tobias Myers got the start in this one. He would go 5 innings, 4 hits. The only run he gave up was a first inning home run by, again, Luis Garcia Jr., who was magically turned into a Brewer killer since Washington traded Lane Thomas, who had the previous title of Nationals Brewer killer. But 5 innings, 4 hits, that earned run for Myers, a walk, 2 strikeouts. He was only at 64 pitches after those 5 innings. Pat Murphy pulling him and going to Hobie Milner for the 6th. And this did not go well. But just before we get into the results, I want to talk about the process first, because that's how it's unfolding in real time. You're going through the process, not knowing for sure what the results are going to be, because you don't get to manage with hindsight. So Tobias Myers had a solid looking line, but this was the second outing in a row where the command was pretty shaky for him for most of the outing. It was also shaky in his start against the Marlins, where he did not work deep into that game despite keeping runs off the board. He also has a fairly pronounced third time through the order split. Right hand, or just batters in general have, I don't remember what the exact number is. I think it's an OPS of over 750 against him that third time through. And in the offensive climate that is 2024 baseball, that's pretty good. That's well above average. So I didn't mind the move to pull him, to be honest with you. And Hobie Milner had been throwing the ball pretty well coming out of the break going into this outing. And he was a guy who was due for some positive regression, and that had been happening for quite a few outings now. I don't mind it really. And Murphy also pointed to it was a hot day out too, so that also can play into the fatigue side of things. It can hit you a little bit sooner on a day like that. So I really didn't mind it. I thought it was okay. I wouldn't have been opposed to giving Myers one more inning, but again, like I don't think he was quite as good as the line would indicate. It's a hot day. You're lined up with a guy who's thrown the ball well lately. You have the third time through the order split. I thought it was fine. And this is something that definitely sparked some controversy within the fan base, but I I don't have a problem with this. And if you've listened to the podcast throughout the year, there have been times where we've gone after Pat Murphy pretty good for some decisions. I'm fine with this one. This doesn't really bother me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think similarly, I would have, if I were personally handling that decision, I probably would have brought him out for the 6th, but I don't have a problem with him not doing that for everything you laid out and everything he laid out. He does struggle against especially lefties the second time through, in the top of the Nationals order, or the third time through. In the top of the Nationals order is a bunch of lefties and some with some big power, and Abrams and Garcia's starting to hit for power, and especially against the Brewers. So I get it. I wasn't upset with the move in the moment. Like you said, Hobie's had been pitching quite a bit better at that moment. I do think the one thing I would have been a little hesitant on is him talking about having like his A bullpen ready to go. I guess within the current roster, he did, but it's not a healthy bullpen right now. So saying like, oh, we have our A pen, kind of. You don't have McGill, you don't have Hudson, you don't have two of your bigger high leverage relievers available out there, really. Um, so I don't know that I totally agree with him in that sense, but either way, I still get what he's saying and I get why he made the move. And I do think the heat has probably been overlooked a little bit here. I mean, umpires weren't even rotating around the bases on calls because they didn't want to run. So it was very hot during this game. And as a pitcher, you can lose a lot of fluids and you can be pretty drained pretty quickly in those types of days. So I think that has been probably overlooked a little bit in the equation.
Where Pat Murphy did lose me in his post-game explanation is when he reviewed Hobie Milner's outing, because he kind of tried to write this whole thing off as just bad luck for Hobie. And there has been a lot of bad luck for Hobie. We've talked about this before. I wrote about it a few weeks ago. And like I said, it seemed like there was positive regression to the mean that had been happening over the last several outings for him. For most of the season, despite the bad results, it's still been the same strikeout rate, the same walk rate, similar quality of contact, all of the ingredients that had made him successful in years past. But it's very important to note that's not what happened in this outing. We need to call it as we see it. And this was not the same deal here for Hobie Miller. He had one batted ball that was legitimately really tough luck. The rest of that inning, though, no. So we had a ground ball single to right that was 101 miles an hour off the bat, a line drive single that was 96 miles an hour off the bat. Those are well hit balls. That's not unlucky. He gets a strikeout. Then comes the infield hit that was hit back to him that they couldn't get him on. It's an infield single. That was like a 70-mile-an-hour chopper basically in front of the plate. That's bad luck.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else, though, after that, not great. James Wood then hit kind of a top spin triple down the line that Jackson Chourio was unable to make a play on. He tried to dive, skirted past him. Maybe a little bit of tough luck there, and that it probably shouldn't have cleared the bases.
Right.
But it's a hit yet, and it wasn't a softly hit ball either. That one was like 93 off the bat, and it was a mistake pitch too. It was right down the heart of the plate. So I don't think you can really write that one off as bad luck either. Maybe, like I said, in the sense of it shouldn't have cleared the bases, but it's still a pretty legitimately bad pitch and a fairly legitimate hit. I don't know that was a ball Chourio was ever going to come up with, just because, again, like you could see it had the top spin on it. Like there was
Right.
it was going to be tough to catch that ball on the fly. In the context of how he's played defense all year, I am still glad that he was being aggressive for it, and I hope that doesn't deter him from continuing to do that, because it has led to him also making a lot of really nice catches that have saved the Brewers some runs. So in the aggregate, I don't mind it, but it probably would have been better if he played this one a little bit more conservatively. He didn't. It gets past him. The base is clear. Next thing you know, Washington has a pretty nice lead now. So was it the right decision to put Hobie Milner in? Again, I don't mind it. I think with hindsight, it obviously did not work out at all, but I think it was good process. I'll say that. I think it was good process. I don't mind it. I know you said, Spencer, you would have brought Myers back out. If I was in Murphy's shoes, just the more I think about this, I think I might have done the same thing in putting Milner out.
Yeah.
So I thought it was completely fine. I know other people are upset by that, and knowing the results obviously doesn't help either, but just from a process standpoint, I didn't mind it. Milner just didn't pitch well. That's the distinction we need to make. I agree with a lot of how Murphy explained what went into the
Mm-hmm.
decision, and I thought the decision was fine. Him trying to rationalize what happened to Hobie Milner in that inning is where he
Yes.
loses me, because that's just not an accurate characterization of the way that inning went. Hobie Milner got hit, and it's important to call it like you see it. Like I don't know if we always do it as well as we'd like to, but we try to. Like, just call it as you see it. When Hobie's getting unlucky, we can say he's getting unlucky. When he's getting hit, we can say he's getting hit. And
Yes.
he got hit in this one. So it is what it is. Brewers unable to come back from that. They did put up 3 in the 8th inning, including a 2-run home run by Gary Sanchez, who also had a quietly nice road trip as well.
Yeah.
But that was not enough to overcome. So the Brewers dropping this one 4-3, dropping the series in Washington 2 games out of 3. Then we move on to Atlanta, and this is where things all of a sudden flipped around for the Brewers. An offensive explosion in Georgia to start their week. The Brewers winning the first game by a score of 10-0. They put up 7 against Bryce Elder, who dominated them in their last homestand when he was starting in Milwaukee. I wrote about some of the adjustments that the Brewers put into place in this outing. I won't go too into detail, but basically the gist of it is they weren't biting at as many sliders off the plate, and they were really attacking the sinker in the zone. Two things that they didn't do as well last time out, so that really helped them out in this game. William Contreras tripling and Willy Adames hitting a 2-run home run in the first inning to get the Brewers off to a hot start. Adames would hit another 2-run home run in his next at bat in the third inning. He would go 4 for 5 in this game. A really big night for Willy. Contreras as well going 3 for 4 with that triple. He would also add 2 doubles as the game went on. Joey Ortiz, this kicked off a stretch of really nice games for him, or a couple of really nice games for him after he really struggled in July. He went 2 for 4 in this one. And then Colin Ray did exactly what you would want any starter to do when staked to a big lead. 7 shutout innings for him with 9 strikeouts. He scattered just 5 hits and a walk. This might be one of the best games I've ever seen Colin Ray pitch, especially as this one went on, too. He just kept getting better as the night continued, even better at hitting the corners and avoiding the heart of the plate. He was backdooring sweepers to lefties, which is not an easy thing to do because that pitch has a ton of lateral movement on it. And when you're backdooring that pitch right on the black, you're pretty locked in command-wise. Like, that's about as close to the pinnacle as you can get in terms of spotting pitches like that. So Colin Ray now, his last 7 outings, he has a 2.90 ERA, a 3.21 FIP, a 28% strikeout rate against just a 6% walk rate. So that's 4.5 strikeouts per walk during this stretch. We talked about it last time, so we won't go into a whole lot of detail. This is just a continuation of it. He's been legitimately really good now for over a month. Before it was, he's been solid with some help from the defense and some good luck mixed in to get him to that mid-3s ERA. Now this last month and a half, it's like there's really no luck or assistance propping him up here. He's just legitimately pitching this well, and it's been really fun to watch.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have talked about Colin Ray so much, and it's all deserved. I mean, genuinely, it's such a fun story for a guy who had to leave pro ball, basically. He had to head overseas. He had to figure things out over there. He was a minor league contract coming back. It's not even like the Eric Fedde thing where he came back on a major league deal. Like, he came back and fought for a spot with a minor league free agency signing, and he's turned himself into a legitimately solid mid-rotation starter in his mid-30s. Like, not many people do that, and especially not ones who, most of his adjustments came after he came back to the U.S. too. Like, that's what's a little different, I feel like, from a lot of these guys. Like, Miles Michaelis went overseas and reinvented himself. Same with Fedde, but like Ray kind of did. He made some changes. He was only there for a year, I believe, and then he came back, got back into the Brewers system. I know he worked with Driveline, and he just kept reinventing himself. And it feels like he just keeps doing that throughout the season too. He just keeps getting better, and that's not easy to do. It's extremely impressive, and it is huge for this Brewers team what he's done this year. Like, so important to what they've done as a team. He's the only starter who's been consistent and available almost every time out. Like, that's so big.
The offense would not stop for the Brewers after game 1. They would put up 8 in game 2 to beat the Braves 8-5. Freddie Peralta, another shaky outing for him, but the Brewers were able to keep coming back and ending up on top in this one. So Freddie's first inning, he started his evening by allowing back-to-back doubles to plate a run, and then a Matt Olson sac fly later in the inning would score the second run. Jorge Soler and Austin Riley hitting those 2 doubles to open up that inning. And this was a weird inning for me because it was like all fastballs down.
Yeah.
And it looked like a couple of them were called to be down because they do use that in Freddie's outings, just throwing the fastball to multiple spots, but mainly if it's down, that's more to steal a called strike or to set up a breaking ball off of that or whatever. But this was even when the target was high, he was missing not only down vertically, but also down the middle, like right
Yeah.
over the white of the plate. And that's the pitches that these two doubles came on. So not good command for him at all in this first inning. And unsurprisingly, the Braves hit it pretty hard. Even that Olsen sac fly, that was a fastball low down the middle, and he drove it pretty well, but it found a glove to score that second run from third. So not a good first inning for Freddie. The command was really bad, especially the fastball there early on. But he did settle in a little bit for the next couple innings, and during that time, the Brewers were able to come back. Joey Ortiz had another nice game, as did Blake Perkins. So Ortiz hit an RBI double in the third to get the Brewers on the board. Then he singled in the fifth to tie it. Perkins following him up later in that inning with a single of his own to give the Brewers a 3-2 lead. Freddie Peralta immediately goes back out and gives up a 2-run home run to Austin Riley, and that puts Atlanta back on top. And those are just kind of the moments where it's like, man, like just as the number one guy, that's tough to see. It's tough to see for any starter to give that up as soon as you get a lead back, but to see it from the guy at the top of the rotation. Fortunately, Colin Rea has done a really nice job, basically kind of being in a lot of ways what I think the Brewers were hoping Freddie Peralta was going to be this year. But
Mm-hmm.
again, we've talked about it a lot, just knowing what Freddie's capable of and what his ceiling is. That's what makes it disappointing more than anything. What's happened, the Brewers have largely been fine without him taking that step or filling that role as well as you'd like because they've gotten production from other guys. So in the context of where the team is at, it hasn't really hurt. But in the context of evaluating just the pitcher himself, that's where you get to a point where it's like, we'd like to see better than that. And those are moments that you have to avoid too. Just getting a lead back right away and then you immediately relinquish it. This pitch to Riley was a changeup that was supposed to be away because that's what he got him on in the previous at bat after that home run, but he missed in. Riley timed it up perfectly, drove it out to left center for that 2-run home run. That'll bring us to our first question of the evening. Our colleague at Brewer Fanatic, Jake McKibben, asks, do you think Contreras could call less fastballs for Freddie, given that, although it's a great pitch, he only has one fastball variation, so he's not like, the Colin Rea mold where it's 3 different kinds of fastballs. It's just a four-seamer for Freddie. So fewer fastballs and lean more on the slider / change, or do location issues cause more trouble? I'm going to say the latter. I think it's hard to nitpick the game calling when Freddie's just not locating the fastball. Like, that's still his best pitch, and that's even with the leaps forward that the slider and the changeup have taken. It's also worth noting too that like Freddie's slider is a chase pitch. So he kind of does have to establish the fastball first. And this is going to sound like me talking like a high school coach, and that's one of the things I don't like, just the generic establish the fastball first. But in Freddie's case, he has to, because when you look at how all the pitches play off each other, maybe the changeup he can get some swing and miss with in the zone, but again, that's because guys are expecting the fastball. So I'm not sure that fewer fastballs is actually the answer for him. I think it's just better execution. And I know that's going to sound like the generic answer, and I don't like giving generic answers that sound like cliches because, just execute the pitch better. That sounds like a cliche a lot of the time, and it is a lot of the time. But in Freddie's case, that really is just what it is. We've talked about this before, getting into better counts, executing more competitive pitches when he is in a favorable count. Tonight it was, throw the fastball to the target instead of missing down the middle, low in the zone. That's really just what it was for him. I don't think this is really an issue where game calling comes into play. You agree with that, Spencer?
I do agree. I think my concern with Contreras falls more with the people who actually have deep repertoires and who can throw all of theirs in the zone and it would be fine. Like Jack said, for the most part, even the changeup, you can land it, but you don't want to land too many changeups in general with pitches. And the slider really is. It's a chase pitch. It's not one. It's one he can steal a strike with once in a while when he fools people. But if it is in the zone, it's hittable. It's not exactly the type of pitch that's going to get a bunch of in zone swing and miss. So he has to throw fastballs. And really, it's more about him commanding it, getting it up in the zone, like he did not do in this Braves game at all. I shouldn't say that. He did better after the first and before the fifth, but he lost it again in the fifth. And yeah, it was another one of those just frustrating starts that just feels like it shouldn't be happening as often as it is with Freddie.
Fortunately for the Brewers, the Braves bullpen essentially imploded after Chris Sale left this game. The Brewers did do a nice job seeing a lot of pitches against him, forcing him out of the game in the fifth inning. So Atlanta having to go to their bullpen early. The Braves bullpen issued a lot of walks as soon as they took over, and that really helped the Brewers out. So Milwaukee having a 3-run sixth inning, and that was initiated by leadoff back-to-back walks by Jackson Chourio and Rhys Hoskins. That set up a Gary Sanchez RBI single that tied it. Gary Sanchez just had his fingerprints all over this road trip. I don't think he gets enough credit, to be honest with you. Like, I think the fan base kind of writes him off as this guy who just kind of sits in the background of the roster and doesn't contribute a whole lot. He's doing like exactly what I was expecting him to do, and probably what the Brewers are expecting as well. He's sitting now on basically a league average slash line with really good numbers against left-handed pitching as a guy who's only making like a guaranteed salary of $3 million. And his job is to be the short side of a platoon, part-time backup catcher slash DH. Like, he's doing a fine job in that role. He's doing, in my mind, I think what the Brewers were hoping for him. And, it's not always super exciting. He's also providing the power as well. They brought him on to provide some power. He's doing that. But yeah, he's doing fine for the role that he's been tasked with filling. I don't see any reason that anyone really needs to have, any problem with him. I think he deserves a little bit more love, or at least recognition, than he's gotten. More acknowledgement of him doing the job that he's been asked to do. I don't think he's gotten that so far this year, and I think he deserves more of it.
Yeah, I agree. We talked about it a little bit when we had the question last week about Haas and Sanchez and which one would have to go, but I still don't think either of them do right now. And when Gary's hot, that power is a really nice thing to have in your lineup. And especially he's been one who can hit lefties, which the Brewers are getting better at and have had a better season against lefties than other seasons. But it's still something they don't have a ton of guys who mash against lefties or hit for power against lefties, and adding him in the lineup against one certainly doesn't hurt. And he had a good trip. Like you said, I honestly think he's a bit underrated defensively as well. And I think he's called an okay game when he's been back there. He doesn't move well. That's the one thing. So I think people think he's being lazy a lot. He just isn't athletic behind the plate. I think he receives okay, and I think he's got a really good arm, a really strong arm. But yeah, I think in terms of backup catchers, it's hard to do too much better than Gary Sanchez. And obviously Haas has been fantastic in his role too, but that's a good problem to have three catchers who are all currently hitting and are all pretty helpful. And you could put him at DH. Sanchez has played some first. Like, there's a little bit of flexibility. It's a good problem to have.
That tangent kind of interrupted the recap I was trying to give of this 3-run sixth inning to give the Brewers leads to Chourio and Hoskins walking to start it off. Gary Sanchez with the RBI single to tie it. Joey Ortiz then drew a walk. And then Blake Perkins, once again, coming up, he hit the go-ahead single in this inning. Joey Ortiz, later in the game, would then hit a second double in the 8th inning. So that would play to run. Andre Monasterio singling in that inning as well. So that gave the Brewers some insurance going into the 9th, which was pretty helpful because it staked Devin Williams to a 4-run lead. He would give up a home run to Jared Kelenic in that inning, but still a pretty comfortable win for the Brewers. So Joey Ortiz, coming off of his solid showing in game 1, he would go 3 for 4 in this one with the 2 doubles. Blake Perkins, again, 3 for 5 in this one as well. So 2 guys at the bottom of the order having a really solid showing on this road trip. Game 3, this was the one that was just off the rails. Brewers 16, Braves 7. And there was so much that happened in this one that I'm not going to do the usual run through it chronologically because that's just too much. The main details that you need to know, assuming you didn't watch this game, which you probably did. The Brewers, this will be a recap for you then. The Brewers hitting 6 home runs in this one. William Contreras hitting another homer. Jackson Chourio hit 2 home runs. Garrett Mitchell homered in this one. Willy Adames homered in this one. Jake Bauers homered in this one. Contreras and Adames also added doubles on top of their home runs. Jackson Chourio, who I mentioned, hit the 2 in this game. Since June 2nd, he is hitting 339, 396, 579 with 9 homers. He's been incredible now for 2 months. And he's now sitting on a slash line that is over 10% better than the league average this year by OPS plus and weighted runs created plus. And he's doing that at age 20. And we won't talk about it a whole lot because we did it last week. But again, just a continuation of just how good he's been over these last 2 months. And he's been one of the guys carrying this Brewers lineup now. So to have him playing a huge role on top of Contreras and Adames and Hoskins, who have done a really nice job lately as well, it's not a surprise that we're seeing this Brewers offense tick back up. And I think just in general, this is good to see for this group because we've kind of tried to follow what we think about this offense throughout the year. Early in the year when they were scoring a ton of runs, we were saying they're a above average offense, not this good. They did come back down to earth for a few weeks, but then it happened to a degree that you would not expect that to continue as well.
Mm-hmm.
The whole lineup did not forget how to hit. You did not have all of Bryce Terang, William Contreras, Joey Ortiz, Hoskins. All of them did not all forget how to hit at the same time. That was not the true talent level of this lineup either.
Yeah.
So now it's good to see them come back a little bit in this series. And baseball is a game of up and downs, but I still think when the dust settles, this will go down as a solid offense. Not a great offense, but a solid offense. So it's good to see that from them this weekend. Back on the Chourio front, I mentioned his numbers over the last 2 months. We had a couple questions relating to him. John on Twitter asks us, how crazy am I for wishing we could give Chourio a Fernando Tatis Jr. type contract right now? I'm going to say you're pretty crazy because I think the deal that he's on right now is perfectly fine. The Brewers are already going to have him for the best seasons of his career. I don't think there's any need for a longer or more lucrative deal from their standpoint. For Jackson, I would be happy for him if he got even more money, which he very well could because he's still going to be at a fairly decent age when that deal expires. He's not even going to be 30 yet when that deal is done.
If it
Well,
goes
it
the
depends
full
on
10 years, he will be 30 years old.
he will be. It depends on if the options get. But point stands, he's still going to be in a pretty decent spot to get another solid contract. But from the Brewers' vantage point, I don't think you need him any longer than they are already going to have him for that deal. Like those first 10 years of his career are going to be the best. And it's very, very likely they're going to get those years for a well below market value over the time that he's here. So I think from the Brewers' vantage point, there don't need to be any thoughts about wishing Chourio was on any kind of different deal than the one he's signed. It's about as team friendly for the Brewers as it could be. And again, you're getting what will be his best seasons.
Yep. I mean, it'd be awesome if we could somehow tack a few more years on of team options. That'd be great. But I'm not going to complain about having him locked up for 10 if we want him. Yeah. I mean, what did those two get? 13 and 12 and 13 years?
Yeah, those are like the 13-year type deals.
So it would be a couple more years into his 30s. I also would not have expected him to sign a deal like that because entering free agency at 30 versus 32 or 33 is a lot different. Like there's a lot more on the table if you do it at 30. So it's good for him. And it's always it looks like it's going to be pretty good for the Brewers. Like Jack said, I mean, I think it'd be more of an upset now if it doesn't look like a pretty good deal by the end of this versus actually looking like a bad deal. Like I'd be more surprised if it looks bad than if it looks pretty good.
Second question on Chourio's deal. Lucas asked us, when things are said and done with Arnold's tenure as GM of the Brewers, will any move be more widely regarded than the Chourio extension? Probably not,
Yeah.
because the ability to lock up that kind of player. I mean, the Yelich trade was that was David Stearns as GM. Matt Arnold was assistant GM, so I'm sure his fingerprints are over that deal. He played a part in it, and that's a deal that kind of helped turn around the trajectory of the franchise. But boiling it down to single moves made by Matt Arnold as the GM, if Chourio turns out to be what everyone's hoping he's going to be, and what I think he will be, yeah, that's going to be pretty tough to top.
Yeah, I think the only one currently that would have any sort of argument is the William Contreras trade. That's always going to be quite the steal. And that was a very, very good move on his part. I do think it somewhat fell into his lap because the A's were just enamored with Esteury Ruiz for some reason, but he still had to make it happen. So that one's always going to be the one that would probably have the best argument. But yeah, if Chourio turns out like we think he's going to, I don't see how anything surpasses it because it's going to look like a really good bargain down the road.
Continuing with our summary of this eventful game, on the pitching side, Frankie Montas making his second Brewers start in this one. 4 innings for him, 2 hits, 3 earned runs, 4 walks, 7 Ks. Some of those walks came amidst some troubles with the pitch comm. So I'm not going to use that as an excuse because that's not an excuse to not execute your pitches, but hot day, some other things going on. It probably doesn't help if you're having a hard time getting the signs, knowing which pitch you need to execute. But you would like for a better start with that kind of lead. But again, like this is really all I'm expecting from Frankie Montas. Again, kind of similar to that national start, just these 5-ish innings. In this case, it was 4, 3 earned. Like I don't think it's going to get a whole lot better than that. Kind of underneath the hood a little bit, looking past just the box score results, he did get a ton of swing and miss on the 4-seamer, and I think it was a combination of Eric Haas knowing it was working and also just having that big of a lead. Really 4-seam heavy for him. He threw it 54% of the time in this start. 9 whiffs out of 24 swings. That's a 38% whiff rate. So it was very effective for him when he was locating it. So that was at least nice to see.
Yeah. Like I said, I feel like the fastball has been a little better just generally than I expected it to be since he came over in these 2 starts. The velo's been up. It was more in line, closer to what it was in Cincinnati today, but he did still touch 97 at least once or twice. I think I might have seen a 98 in there. I was only half watching this one on my I was working, so I wasn't supposed to be watching, but I was watching. And it was, yeah, I mean, the big thing was just you can't be walking 4 guys when you have a huge lead. And like you said, and I brought that up to you. So I think the pitch comm was annoying him. Like he was visually getting annoyed with the pitch comm. And I think he lost some focus, which isn't an excuse. I just think that's what happened. So hopefully that won't be an issue moving forward. But I do think I might have a little bit more hope for him than I did at the time of the trade after seeing him in these first 2 starts. I think there might be a little bit more than I originally thought, but I'm expecting him to be a decent 5 and dive type pitcher who, like you said earlier, just mostly keeps you in games. There might be more strikeout stuff than I was expecting in there.
In the interest of covering all of the things that we think need to be covered, we will talk about some downsides that showed up in a 16-7 win. And that probably won't make some people happy, but I do think that these are just some relevant things to talk about that we saw in this one. Willy Adames' defense, first of all. We've talked about this a little bit. I know I tweeted about it earlier in the series, just about how good Willy's been at the plate for the last month or so, and it was fantastic on this road trip, especially in Atlanta. He's having his best offensive season since his first year with the Brewers, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. On the flip side, he is having arguably his worst defensive season with the Brewers, and it continued in this one. He made another error in the first inning that ultimately cost Frankie Montas 10 more pitches to get out of that first, so it ended up being a 30-pitch inning instead of a 20-pitch inning, which it's got a trickle-down effect for the rest of that start, especially in the first inning. And again, it was another routine play that he just didn't make. And we've seen more of that probably within the last 3 weeks or so. It started before the All-Star game. We saw him make some misplays in the Nationals series when the Brewers were at home. We saw him misplay some balls in Chicago. We saw him misplay some balls in just a couple of different series here now. I believe he's got 6 errors kind of during this 3 to 4 week stretch that we're talking about, and a lot of them are fielding errors. And when you look at the numbers on the season, and I'm going to bring in all of the major defensive metrics just in the interest of getting as holistic of a look at this as possible. He's got a -7 defensive runs saved. That's the one that's by far, the most bearish on his defense. -2.8 ultimate zone rating per 150 games. So that's scaled out to a full season's worth of play. He does have 4 outs above average. That's the one that likes him the most. It is probably the one that I don't value quite as much. The more I look into these defensive metrics, I think DRS is the one I like the best, and this is also the one that's the highest on Bryce Terang, and there's kind of been, just some discussion about
Mhm.
all of these defensive metrics, and if you know how all of these are calculated too, I do think DRS is the most nuanced out of all of them because DRS is built on video scouting. Like, you have humans watching these plays, and granted, human eye is flawed. So I'm not going to say that it's perfect, but the human eye is going to be better at picking out more of the factors that go into being a good defender, especially in the infield, than outs above average. Outs above average is just looking at where the fielder was positioned, where the ball was hit, how hard the ball was hit, and then the speed of the runner. Those are the main factors. And it basically just gets plugged into an algorithm that is all based on probabilities, and it'll spit out the number. But it's not going to count for things like, did the ball take a tough hop? It's not going to count for things like, runners on base, the game situation. DRS also, with the video scouting, these video scouts go through and they kind of like check mark certain plays as, like, this was a really good defensive play. This was a defensive misplay. And outs above average isn't quite structured the same way. So I'd be willing to bet that Adames is so low in DRS because DRS has probably seen some like misplays that it's dinging him for a lot more than, say, outs above average. But
Mhm.
so DRS doesn't like him. Ultimate zone. So DRS thinks he's been a legitimately bad defender this year. Ultimate zone rating says he's been below average. Outs above average says he's been pretty good. And then Baseball Prospectus, their defensive metric, defensive runs prevented, has him at 0. So he's average there. But across the board, these are all way worse than any of the figures he's put up
Yep.
as a Brewer. And I've done like a preliminary look into this. It seems to me, and judging defense is never going to be an exact science. Out of all the things that we try to judge in baseball, this is by far the hardest. It's not close because there's just so much that goes into it. And we haven't found a great way to quantify stuff to remove or account for human bias with the eye test. So it's by far the least refined. But to me, it seems like it's a mix of his range is grading out worse, not necessarily because he's lost a step, but because he's taking some questionable approaches on ground balls that we haven't really seen from him. So you talk about some of these routine plays that he's biffed, and that's really the second one. So questionable approaches to ground balls on plays that are not going down as errors, but he didn't approach it well. So maybe that could be the difference between a guy beating a ball out or he doesn't get to a ball, and then just biffing some routine plays that are hit right at him. So you have, like the ones that happened in that Atlanta series. One that I go back to that had both of these happen was the Marlins series. Freddie Peralta started that one, and Willie made the error on a routine ground ball hit right at him that scored a couple runs, kind of did not help Freddie's line out at all. And in that same game, later in the game, he had a soft ground ball that this is like any infielder would see this off the bat and know you got to charge this thing because you got to, as an infielder in general, you're usually better off attacking the ball.
Yes.
Go after the ball. And that's usually what Willie's really good at. Like, if you look at this Brewers infield, all of these guys, watch their footwork, watch how they read balls, watch how they attack balls. It's usually fantastic. And that's a big part of just the number of extra outs they get. Willie, on this play in particular, and I think this has happened several times, but this is like one that really jumped out to me. This is an automatic ball to charge. He starts charging it, stops like he suddenly decided he's going to play it back now, and then realized that wasn't the way to play it, and then started charging again, like resumed charging it. And that almost cost him an out.
Yeah.
It was almost an infield single as a result of that. And it became a really close play at first base versus normally, and he would normally do this, just attack that ball all the way through.
Yeah.
And it was a routine play too. Like, to me, that just says, for whatever reason, he's not reading the ball off the bat very well right now. And that's what's really going to ripple into these worse defensive ratings that you're seeing. I know outs above average seems to think that it hasn't had much impact, but again, DRS thinks it's been really bad this year. Ultimate Zone Rating says it's been below average according to Baseball Prospectus. So you have more evidence, I think, that points to it has been a pretty major drop off. And even just, again, across the board, all of these numbers are way worse than what he's usually put up with the Brewers. And I'm not saying this to knock on Willie. Like, again, the offense has been about as good as it's been since his first season with the Brewers. And he's massively helping the lineup right now with what he's doing. But this is a thing that's happening, and it's not like a couple one-offs anymore. Like, it's becoming a trend that he's making misplays, and the numbers aren't good for him defensively, especially not nearly as good as they usually are. So that this is a thing that's happening. I'm sure the Brewers are probably on notice about it internally, but I think we need to take note of it as well, because it is a thing that's happening, and you would like for it to get a lot better because defense is such a big part of the Brewers' identity.
Yeah, just to throw a couple numbers to compare to last year's numbers, he was at 8 defensive run saves last year. So that's a 15, I don't know if point is the right word to use there, but 15 defensive run save difference between last year. He was at 5.4 in ultimate zone rating per 150. So that's a huge drop as well. And then, like you said, he's above average in outs above average, but it was 16 last year, and it's 4 right now. And obviously, that's a cumulative stat. So,
right, but we're far enough into the year to know that's a huge. It's going to be a huge swing, no matter how it finishes.
Even if it gets to like 6 or something, it's still a huge drop from where it was last year. I don't have the Baseball Prospectus one with me, but it's a huge swing on all those numbers. And even though some say, he's been okay or a little bit better than average, it's still regression in a pretty big way. And yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think the way he's attacking the ball, I feel like his angles to stuff like up the middle he's almost trying to cut stuff off earlier, which is not how you get to things that are in holes either way, like either direction. You just have to take good angles to it. And it feels like he's just not doing that. And that won't show up in errors. That won't even show up like in a game. You might not notice that. But if somebody's going back and watching these like they are for defensive run saved, that's when they're going to notice it. And if you're not looking for it, you won't catch it, but it will get caught in those types of things. And I think that's a big part of it too. I just think he's not just reading the ball well immediately, but I think even in general, he's just not reading it well, like how hard it was hit or the type of angle he needs to take to get to a ball in the hole. So it's been weird to watch because he has been fantastic defensively. I mean, he's going from like one of the best defensive shortstops in baseball the last few years with the Brewers to this. And that's kind of a shell-shocking thing. And I'm sure some people aren't thrilled to hear about it, but like Jack said, I think it's something that needs to be talked about a little bit because it matters a lot to the Brewers' identity that their middle infield especially plays really good defense, and he just hasn't been. But again, we don't want to just rip on him. The guy has, coming into today, since the start of July, he has a 150 WRC plus. Like, he's been an incredible hitter, and that does not include his homer today and his his double today and everything else he did. Like, he's adding a ton on the offensive side right now, but the defense has definitely stepped back. And I don't think there's much argument to be made. Every single metric would say it has. And frankly, to the eye test, it feels like it's getting even more obvious than it already was earlier too.
Another downside from this otherwise really positive series and really positive game. Hobie Milner making his first appearance since that Nationals game. This one again did not go well for him. He gave up 2 more runs, hit pretty well again, a lot of loud contact. The end of the line might be coming soon for him.
Yeah.
And like I talked about this before, we've talked about this before, I wrote about it before, just how for most of the year, the struggles we were seeing were mostly the result of him getting unlucky more than pitching badly or pitching poorly.
Mm-hmm.
These last 2 outings have been different. He's getting hit now. This is not, soft contact finding holes anymore, or infield hits or bloop singles. He's getting hit now, and that's a different story than what we had been seeing for much of the year. So it might not look a whole lot different in terms of ERA. It might look like he's just kind of been in the same place for a couple months now. This is different than what we had been seeing for most of the year. These are legitimate struggles now that he's going through. And the reason I say the end of the line is coming soon, it's not exclusively just him, but it's also the fact that you have Brian Hudson's about to come back, Rob Zastrisny. It never seemed like it was going to be a long absence for him. We haven't really heard anything new, but there was never anything to indicate he would be out for very long. That's another lefty. DL Hall looks like he's on the mend. There'll be another lefty. You have a lot of guys who are left-handed pieces in that bullpen who are on the mend, and you're going to need roster spots for those guys. And it's going to become a lot trickier to carry Hobie now on top of those other lefties coming back. Like you're not going to be in a spot where you're carrying 4 left-handed relievers in your bullpen. That's half your bullpen. You're just not going to do that. So someone's going to need to be on the chopping block, and it might end up being the guy who just hasn't thrown the ball well the last couple times out. And it sucks for Hobie. He's been a very valuable part of this bullpen for a few years now, and he deserves a lot of credit for some of the adjustments he made over the years and also just how much he refined his command.
Mm-hmm.
Before he came to the Brewers, he was a pretty high walk guy. And then he got here and he fixed it. And for those 2 years, especially where he was really good, it was almost like automatic that everything was going to be on the edges. Like he, in terms of, according to StatCast, like pitches in the shadow zone, he had one of the highest rates in baseball over that 2-year stretch. But he's getting hit now, and that puts him on the edge of a roster crunch. It just doesn't put him in a favorable spot. So it might be a situation where he doesn't make it through the end of the year, especially because he's looking like a non-tender candidate at this point anyway.
Yeah.
The Brewers might just say, hey, man, like, there's not a whole lot we can do. He could, if he wanted to, accept an optional assignment to AAA because he does have an option left. I don't know exactly how much service time he's got at this stage, but he was kind of right on that borderline of having those 5 years going in, at which point you can reject an optional assignment. So maybe they try that. But either way, his time on, at the very least, the active roster, the 26-man, it could be winding down.
Yeah. I don't have too much to add. I do think we also have Jared Koenig in the bullpen right now. Like there's just so many lefties that are going to have to be rostered already. And even though for a large majority of the season, he was underperforming his peripherals by a ton, it has started to be a little bit more like he got hit hard the last 2 times out. And the ERA is around 5 in August. Like at that point, when you get that deep into a season, it would already be kind of hard to not justify, but just in terms of keeping him, it's hard to do it in that type of spot. And when you have 3 lefties coming back and 1 already in your pen beyond him, it's a roster crunch situation for a guy who just hasn't gotten results this year. And it does suck. Hobie's been awesome for the Brewers in a surprising way. Based on, like you said, when we signed him, it was a soft tossing lefty with command issues. Those aren't usually the greatest pitchers of all time when they don't have huge strikeout stuff and they have bad command, but he really turned himself into a solid pitcher, and it hasn't worked out this year. Relievers are fickle. It's not shocking, but it sucks to see.
On that note, we'll jump into some of our loose ends, a few listener questions that we got that we have not yet answered during this episode. First one we're going to cover does kind of tie into the theme of returning lefties to this pitching staff. Cheesehead Kami asks, how confident are you that DL Hall will be an effective starter for both the rest of this season or beyond? And then he also adds, if he's destined to be a bullpen arm, do you think the Brewers would shop pitchers like Devin Williams or even Jacob Mizorowski in the offseason? Long term, I do still believe in DL Hall as a starter. At this stage of the year, though, I don't know if you can plug him right back into that role, at least a full starting role, maybe like a hybrid role where he gets the start, so to speak, but it's like 3 innings and then you tandem him with a Bryce Wilson or a Joe Ross or whoever it may be. But I do still like the Arsenal as a starter. I think that the secondaries are better than they get attention for or they get credit for. And I actually think they look pretty decent in some of his starts early in the year. A lot of it ties into, can you get the best version of that fastball back? He's gotten the velocity back this year. The shape is still a little iffy.
Yeah.
So I kind of think at this point, it might take just a offseason step back. Let's work on some things, see if we can get that fastball back to what you've shown before, because it's not just strictly velocity. Like it was also better shape wise in the past. And that's something that he needs to get back as well. But I think if you give him another offseason to kind of, like I said, take a step back, develop a little more, work on some things, I do still believe in him as a starter long term. It's a starter's arsenal. This year, probably got to limit him to some shorter spurts the rest of the way or kind of that hybrid role. As far as shopping guys in response to his role, Devin Williams is getting traded this offseason, regardless of what role DL Hall fills. At the very least, he should get traded.
Yep.
I 100% believe you should do it. Always sell relievers. That's just the best way to go about it. And I think that doing it this offseason before Devin goes into his final year, I think that's the best way to do it. Just do what you did with Corbin Burns. Brewers played that situation perfectly as well. Do it with Devin. So he's getting dealt no matter what happens with DL Hall. I don't think Mizorowski is someone you need to shop because DL Hall's not stopping you from putting Jacob Mizorowski in the bullpen. There's so many moving parts that go into constructing a pitching staff and go into constructing a bullpen. You know, unless the Brewers get offered an arm and a leg for a guy like Mizorowski, who I still think is destined for the bullpen, I think you have to consider it, but I don't think it needs to be in response to any of the other guys you have in that pen because, again, Mizorowski's so good and he doesn't have big league experience yet. I won't rule out that they do the same thing with Mizorowski as he's closing in on the end of his club control in a few years. You know, do the trade, the Burns or Devin or Hader or whoever it is. But then you're doing it because he's established himself as a elite reliever at that point. I don't think you make that move right now.
Yeah, I don't have much to add on that. I think I'm on the exact same page with Hall. This season, I would not say I'm super confident in him as a starter, but you put him in maybe a piggyback role with like Joe Ross or Bryce Wilson coming in after him, like 3 to 4 innings of Hall into one of those guys for a couple innings. Sure. Like, I think that could work out fine for the Brewers, but I wouldn't expect him to be shoving in a starter's role by any means. But I do agree. I still have hope. I have more than hope for him as a starter. I do believe he's going to be able to start and do pretty well down the road. I should note the fastball shape is better than it was in the majors this year, but it's still not where you would want it to be and where it has been in the past. So it's nice to see some progress. It's still a better pitch than what we saw, and the velo being up at least gives it a little bit more room for error as well, but it's still not exactly what I would want to see. But I agree. I think the secondaries are fine and more than fine in some cases. And he's got a starter's repertoire, and I think they need to continue to try that next year, even if it doesn't work out the rest of this season. And yes, on Devin Williams, I'll say the same thing I said about Burns going into the offseason last year. I would be much more surprised if Devin Williams is on the opening day roster than if he isn't next year. I believe the Brewers will, and I believe they should trade him, but I do agree it should be in the offseason. We don't need to do any try and, play out the season, see if we're doing well, and then potentially, no, he should get traded. He's going to have value, and he's a reliever, and he's already had some shoulder issues. He's had a back issue. There's plenty of risk into carrying him into the next season and trying to hold that value or potentially move him at the deadline. make the trade now, bite the bullet. The Brewers have shown they can make it work without him. They just did it for the first half this year. And they do have a guy like Mizorowski coming up who could potentially be a high leverage guy pretty early on in his career. And other people who, even if Hall does move to the pen, he could be a high leverage guy if he ends up in the pen. Like they will be able to make it work with or without Devin. So they should trade him, and I believe they will. But yeah, I agree on Miz too. I don't have anything to add there. I think there's really no reason unless somebody comes with an insane offer for you.
Next question comes from Johnny Castle on Twitter. It sounds like an action hero name.
Yeah.
Johnny Castle. On a scale of 1 to 10, he asks, how wrong are you guys on Garrett Mitchell? This question made me smile. So just for some context for this question, Garrett Mitchell in 2024, he's gone on a hot streak the last few weeks. He's quietly been, statistically in terms of results, one of the Brewers' best hitters, especially since Christian Yelich went down with the reoccurrence of that back injury. He's got a 135 weighted runs created plus this year. He's now got a career 807 OPS. I believe he's over 200 career plate appearances at this point as well. So the context is he's a fun player to watch when things are working.
Mm-hmm.
He's got the highest ceiling out of all the guys in this group. And just in terms of results, he's the only one outside of Chourio. But, out of the Mitchell, Frelick, Weimer, that trio, he's the only prospect who has actually had some clearly strong results in the big leagues so far. And I think that means a lot of the fan base holds him in very, very high regard. I don't blame anyone for that. My biggest thing is still just that there are concerns about how well the profile is going to do as he gets more and more exposure to big league pitching. And that's kind of why both of us have been saying for a couple years now that we just don't think he's going to be a sustainably good big league hitter with this current profile without some pretty big changes, mainly just changes to the swing path more than anything. I will give him credit. He's been way more selective at the plate this year.
Yep.
He made a point of making sure he wasn't chasing pitches above the zone. He's been way better at that, and he deserves a lot of credit for it. That still doesn't address, though, the main profile concerns I had about him. The chase was never really a concern for me. The biggest issues for me were just, one, the ground ball rate. He's always hit a lot of balls on the ground, but he can beat those out with his speed. So that's kind of a secondary concern. The big one for me is just there's a hole in his swing.
Yep.
And it's velocity up. And the reality is, even with the results he's had this year, it's still there. We've still seen it. And I'll kind of rattle off a couple of numbers and some examples here to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. Because I think, people have heard both of us say there's a hole in this swing, but I think it would help if they had some examples of what that looks like, just to kind of get the point across. So Garrett Mitchell this year in the big leagues on high fastballs, his swing and miss rate is still insane.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of MLB Game Day, like I'm sure most people have followed the game on MLB Game Day, and they got that little strike zone where the strike zone is divided up into 9 boxes. So it's 3 boxes across the top, 3 boxes across the middle, 3 boxes across the bottom. Garrett Mitchell on the middle box at the top of the zone, he's got a 57% swing and miss rate, or a 57% whiff rate in that box, on pitches in that box. So pitches that are middle up, top of the zone, like over the middle of the plate. He is swung and missed on over half of his swings against those fastballs this year. And when I say fastballs, I mean 4-seamers, sinkers, and cutters. That's what we're talking about. For the box that is top of the zone away from him, so outer third of the plate elevated, his whiff rate on those fastballs is 78%. So that's over 3/4 of the time so far this year when he sees that fastball high and away still in the strike zone, he's swinging and missing at it. And some specific at-bats I'm going to point to, both of these against the Braves in these recent series. Joe Jimenez pitched to him in Milwaukee on the last homestand. Every pitch he threw him was in, or at least on like the border of that up and away box. It was 3 fastballs in a row, all in the same spot. Garrett Mitchell swung and missed at all 3 of them. Pretty easy strikeout. On Thursday, he hit the home run against Charlie Morton. That at-bat started with him swinging and missing at a high fastball from Charlie Morton, and then he crushed a hanging breaking ball, which, give him credit for crushing the mistake. He's proven he can hit those pitches.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not a fluke. Then, in his next at-bat, he swung and missed at 3 straight high fastballs for a strikeout. So, like, this is very clearly still a problem. There's very clearly still a hole in his swing path, and its velocity elevated. Again, the ground ball rate is still a concern for me, too. He's got a 56% ground ball rate this year. He's got a 392 batting average on balls in play, still a 420 batting average on balls in play for his career. I'm not going to get into the details right now, but basically you can't do that. I don't care how good you are. Even some of the best hitters in baseball history have not been able to maintain that kind of output on balls in play. Like, you just don't have that many balls in play going for hits. So he has been pretty lucky on that front. And even if you want to say he hasn't been that lucky on that front and that's been deserved so far, you can't continue hitting baseballs in just the right spot where you get that good of fortune on putting the ball in play. Like, it is not a skill to have a 400 BABIP. That's not a skill. That's just chance. So that's going to go down for him. That's going to hurt him. But really what's going to hurt him is at some point, pitchers are just going to start hammering high fastballs. And they already throw him more fastballs than the average hitter sees. But at some point, like, guys are going to realize we can have this guy eating out of the palm of our hand if we just only throw him high fastballs. And in a way, this reminds me a lot of what we saw from Keston Hiura early in his career. Garrett Mitchell's a way different player overall than Keston Hiura. Garrett Mitchell's fast. He's an elite defender. So at the very least, I think he'll have an easier time staying on big league rosters than Keston Hiura did, because Keston Hiura had basically no other skills outside of what was supposed to be a really good hit tool. But it's a similar situation. Keston Hiura had really, really good results to begin his big league career. Then pitchers realized there's a giant hole in his swing, and they began exploiting that hole, and Keston Hiura has not consistently hit big league pitching since. And I'm just really, really worried that that's exactly what's going to happen to Garrett Mitchell offensively. Guys are eventually going to realize just how big this hole is, and they're going to do everything they can to exploit it. And if he doesn't make some kind of change to his swing or his swing path, it's pitchers are going to start to eat him alive once they make that change. And if he is unable to change back. And that's really just what I worry about. I'll start believing, and I want to believe, like, I never want any player to, flame out. But really if people are asking, what's it going to take for me to finally buy in on Garrett Mitchell, it's going to have to be he just stops looking so overmatched on any velocity above the belt.
Mm-hmm.
And it hasn't happened yet. I know the results have been good, but the reality is it's still a small sample. It's also a disjointed sample. It's 3 disjointed samples. That also makes it really hard to tell where he's actually at. I still think if he gets a full season's worth of at-bats concurrently, it'll start to fall apart pretty quickly. So I'd like to be wrong, but just when you're evaluating a player, these are things you got to look for. And when you see all of these signs pointing to a big hole in the swing, you can't just write that off.
Yeah. I brought a bunch of numbers to talk about, but you have covered a lot of them in a very similar way. So I'll quickly throw out a couple.
You're welcome.
A couple I have here. So using like that, what they call the top rail, meaning the top 3 spots on game day, if you're looking at the zone, and then above on fastballs, it's a 60% whiff rate for his career now on those pitches, including those 3 and above. Just for reference, you mentioned Keston. I was going to as well. For reference, Keston had a 47% whiff rate on those pitches. So Garrett Mitchell's is 13% higher than Keston Hiura's was in his time. And Keston's, that was his downfall for sure. Now, what I will say with Mitchell, and you mentioned it, but I will give him credit. I think he's doing a better job of not going above the zone this year to go after them, which helps. That does help, because he is making pitchers pay for mistakes, which means if you can limit going above the zone with your swings, and pitchers, yes, they're very good, but they're not going to be able to hit that top rail all the time when they're trying to. Sometimes they're going to miss above, sometimes they're going to miss down in the zone, like we saw with Freddie in that start we were talking about. If you can take advantage of that, he might be able to make it work. And so far, he has. So I'll give him credit. But like you talked about as well, it's a 420 BABIP for his career at this point. That's completely unsustainable. Like it's not sustainable no matter what you think about him. And he is going to be a higher BABIP guy, I think, no matter what, because he is fast. He's going to reach base on some grounders. I think he does kind of hit the ball the opposite way a little bit more on like he can poke stuff, and that can help BABIP a little bit at times, but it's not 420 high. Like, well, that's actually double meaning. But but it's not sustainable at all. And even if you look at like just going back in time, Brandon Marsh in 2022 to 2024, I grabbed this from Swaim Rules on Brewer Fanatic, so shout out to him on this, but he has the highest BABIP in that time frame. It's 370. The next closest is 356. There are only 4 people with a 350 or higher BABIP over a 3-season period where they have like close to qualifying at bats. That's more in line with like the highest side of what you could expect from Mitchell. I don't think it will be there in the end either once he gets a bigger sample. It's just, I would say I believe in Mitchell a bit more than I did coming into this season, because I do think that he has improved his swing decisions. And I do think he's shown that he can take advantage of mistakes. And the guy can hit the ball hard. Like the ceiling, like Jack said, is as high as anyone short of Chourio on the team. Really, I mean, Yelich not included. But overall, what he can do defensively, base running, pure power, like it is up there. And it does give him a lot more room for error than a guy like Keston had, who was a one-dimensional player to begin with. But to believe in him at the level of some people who I think kind of view him as like a future all-star, a future like tone setter in a lineup. And I get it, because the numbers have shown, the surface numbers have shown a guy who could be really fun and really good. I'm still not there, and I need to see him. Like Jack said, he's got to prove he can at least get the bat to those pitches up there where it can't just be completely exposed. And then he's got to continue to do the other things he's doing right now at the same time, meaning he's got to continue to not chase a ton, especially above the zone. And he's got to be able to take advantage of those mistakes, because I doubt at any point will he do damage on high fastballs. It's more going to be about just being able to not let them beat him every single time. Like that's really where the point he needs to get to. And if he does get there, our predictions on his career could look dumb, but I will say, I think that's always been the qualifier with what we've said, is that he has that capability of being pretty good. It's just, there's a big, big concern in there that he has to show us he's gotten rid of at some point, and he hasn't done that yet.
Yeah, so I guess to answer the actual question here, how wrong are we on Garrett Mitchell?
3.
I'm going to say that the sample is too inconclusive to know. It's still too small of a sample. Jury's still out. But in terms of has he done anything to alleviate our concerns, not enough to change the larger projection that we have for him, I think is the best way to phrase it. So
yeah,
hopefully that answered the question, because I do think this is something that, like, just when anyone has an opinion on a player that seems to go against what a lot of other people think, like, it's good to just lay it out and explain kind of what you're seeing. So hopefully that kind of clears some things up. We'll go to our next question now. This one comes from Patrick. He asks us about first base options for next year in the event that Rhys Hoskins opts out. Spencer, do you got any first base options for next year who are on your mind?
Jake Bauers would be one of them for me.
He would, yes.
I think Tyler Black will get consideration for it if Rhys leaves. Although if Bauers is there, that's still going to be 2 lefties, which makes it difficult. I would say Brock Wilken would be a name that wouldn't completely shock me either if third doesn't end up working out, because he's a righty. I think the bat is definitely coming along, and yeah, I mean, that's internally, those are the names I would look at. Wes Clark, maybe, but he's going to really have to clean up the swing and miss, and I don't fully believe that he ever will. So those are the names I would look at. And then in terms of the qualifying offer thing, I think if he opts out, you probably do throw it at him because it's not that much more than what the player option would be.
Yeah.
And you could get a pick if he ends up declining that and signing elsewhere. And if not, you're only paying a little bit more than what he would have been getting if he opted in. So I would throw it at him if he does opt out.
I'm still a little skeptical that he will opt out
I don't think he will.
I don't think he will either. He's been way better over these last few weeks in the power department, but overall, like you're looking at his season, he's still been about a replacement level player.
Yep.
I'm a little wary of WAR for first base because I'm not sure we actually properly quantify the value of defense at first base. Although in Reese's case, like he's bad at those things that we don't
Right.
quantify either. So I guess it doesn't really apply to him. Like he's not good. He's got bad hands, bad range. He doesn't do anything well defensively at first base. So you pair the negative of the defense with a bat that's been about 10% better than league average by OPS or weighted runs created plus. I don't know that that's enough for him to feel comfortable about getting a nice deal on the open market. So, especially coming off of the ACL injury as well. And I do think the defense is tied to that a little bit as well. Like he's never been a good defensive first baseman.
No.
He usually hasn't been this bad though.
Right.
Like he's it's been another added level of badness in the field. And I do think coming off the knee injury doesn't help that. Like I think he's never been a fast guy. He's never, been quick on his feet or light on his feet. But I think that has taken an even further step back coming off of the lower body injuries. He also had the hamstring injury this year too. That doesn't help either. So 2 lower body injuries that you're coming off of. I could see him opting in next year. I think he will opt in for next year. See if he can have an even better season next year, like a true bounce back next year.
Mm-hmm.
And then you hit the open market again. And maybe then you can secure, like a 2, maybe 3-year deal. I think that's the route it's probably going to take. But if he doesn't, and if he does end up elsewhere, Spencer, I do think the options that you outlined would be some good ones to go to as well. With that, we are going to move on to Spencer's favorite portion of the program. It is the minor league sandbox, where Spencer gets to talk about anything and everything going on in the Brewers farm system. Spencer, I see you have all of your notes ready, so I will allow you to take it away.
Thank you so much, Jack. We did have a couple of questions on this portion to start off. Michael Parr asked us, who is the next player to get called up to the Brewers for the first time? Does it happen this year? I think it's between Mizorowski and Yoho. I'll still always throw out Chad Patrick as a possibility, just in case they need a starter. And he is stretched out. He's been doing really well at AAA. But Miz and Yoho seem like the 2 guys who could make a legitimate impact in the bullpen. So those are the 2 I would go with there. Noah asked, why isn't Yoferi Rodriguez getting more top 100 hype? He's 18 in low A. He's holding his own with a 129 WRC+. Not quite as mature as Jackson Chourio at this age, but taking a similar path so far. I'll answer that one first, and then he also asked, since it's past midseason, how would you re-rank the Brewers' top 5 to 10 prospects going forward? So Aram Layton does really good work for Just Baseball. He posted his top 100 today, actually, and Yoferi did come in at 96 on that list. I think overall it's not bad, but there's some plate discipline concerns with him. It's keeping it down a little bit. I think those have improved quite a bit over the last couple of months, so he did end up on a list today. I think there's a possibility he will on a couple in the offseason as well, but the other thing is he's not quite like the burner or surefire defender in center field as some of the other guys like Chourio have been. So I think that's hurting him as well. But I like Yoferi a lot. I like the bat a lot. I think he's going to be a really solid prospect. And I think we probably will see him pop up on more top 100s, maybe not even this offseason, but at some point next year as likely a 19-year-old in high A already. I'm not going to talk about these guys much, but my current top 10 for prospects is Jefferson Cairo, Jacob Mizorowski, Tyler Black, Brock Wilken, Cooper Pratt, Robert Gasser, Logan Henderson, Yoferi Rodriguez, Eric Batanti, and Luke Adams. So there's my top 10. At some point, I'm planning to talk a little bit more about that either on Twitter or Fanatic or something. But right now, I haven't had a ton of time to do that, but those are my top 10 guys. And then moving into our pitching performances to highlight, we, of course, have our Craig Yoho update. It's really just that he was promoted to AAA, which is very exciting. He has not pitched yet. He didn't pitch today. I checked. I'm hoping tomorrow. I just want to get StatCast data on him because we finally have that now that he's in AAA, and I'm extremely interested in seeing what it looks like from pitch to pitch. But I already told all the fun stats on him for now, so we'll probably have some more once he does pitch in AAA and possibly beyond. Like I said, I think he's a very real candidate for a major league promotion at some point. Logan Henderson also promoted to AAA. He is starting on Friday night, so the night this comes out. In AA, he made 9 starts. He had a 33% strikeout rate to a 4% walk rate, which is fantastic. 3.3 ERA, but he underperformed his peripherals pretty much across the board because of that strikeout and walk rate. He did have a little bit of a home run thing. The way his fastball plays, that's not shocking. He probably will be a guy who gives up some homers, but big strikeouts and low walks are a very good combination. He had 8 or more strikeouts in 4 games. He had 10 or more in 2 of his starts, and he pitched into the 6th inning in 6 of his 9 starts. So eating innings and doing so as someone who had not pitched above low A coming into the year and now is in AAA, very impressive from him. In his time in AA, he posted the 6th highest whiff rate out of 130 AA pitchers who had at least 30 innings in that time, and that was at 32.2%. So generating a lot of whiffs, getting strikeouts, not walking guys. Really, really good combo. On that note, we have Casey Hunt, who was also promoted. He made it to AA. Absolutely ridiculous numbers he's posting. He is an undrafted free agent from last year, so you can include him in the insane 2023 haul that the Brewers had. He's already started. He started the year in low A as a reliever, moved to high A, moved to the starting rotation. His percentile ranks in terms of 788 minor league pitchers who have thrown at least 50 innings. He has a 1.95 ERA, which is 98th percentile. His 1.9 FIP is 99th percentile. His 37.5% whiff rate is 98th. His 37% strikeout rate is 99th. And his strikeout to walk ratio of 6.25 is 98th percentile. He has been unbelievable. This is an undrafted free agent out of college last year who's already in AA. We got some numbers on his slider from Baseball America today. It's been the 3rd best in baseball in terms of swinging strike rate, or in minor league baseball. And it also is something he lands in the zone quite a bit and gets a lot of in-zone whiffs on. So we talked about Freddie Peralta's slider not being that type of pitch. Hunt's is. So he's a very, very exciting pitcher. Somebody that is way up on my list for an undrafted guy. He's just moved incredibly fast, and he's deserved it. Another late round pick last year, Brett Witrowski, moved to AA super quickly. He's made 2 starts in August, probably 2 of his best at the AA level. 9 1/3 innings pitched total, 10 strikeouts to 3 walks, 6 hits, so a whip under 1. He's only given up 1 earned run in that time, and he has a 34% whiff rate in those starts. I think he's starting to adjust to AA. Like I said, he made 3 appearances at high A. He had never pitched in the ACL or in low A. And he was a day 3 pick out of college last year. So one thing to note, his platoon splits have largely evened out. It was a huge split in high A where lefties were crushing him and righties were not doing anything. Now neither of them are crushing him. They're both doing okay against him, but he's not 22 yet. He will be next week. He's very young for AA, and I think he's figuring things out. So it's exciting to see. A couple DSL pitchers to watch. Don't normally talk about them, but there were a couple names that stood out to me, and I found some video on, so I wanted to talk about them. But Carlos Cara, he had 4 innings pitched, 6 strikeouts to 2 walks in his last appearance. He has some walk issues on the season. It's almost 1 an inning, but he's low 90s. He's only 17 years old. Very big breaking ball, and a solid looking changeup. So he's striking out about 19 in I think 12 innings so far. So it's a small sample, but he's shown some pretty good stuff, and he won't be 18 until the end of this year. And then Anderson Mercado is a really fun one. He had 4 innings pitched. He struck out 10 in his last appearance to 1 walk. He is up into the mid 90s at 17 already. and his ERA is over 5, but hitters have an insane 396 BABIP against him. His walks are somewhat in line, like they're less than 4.5 per 9, which in the DSL is not bad. But yeah, he signed for 10,000 this last year. He was originally looked at as a position player when he was going to sign in international free agency, and then he moved to the mound. He's a left-handed pitcher, I should note, and he's been up to 95 already. People think his build and the arm speed he has means he's going to be somebody who could get into the upper 90s and potentially touching triple digits. So seeing 10 strikeouts in 4 innings is a good sign that he's kind of starting to adjust to the mound. He's new to pitching, and yeah, there's been some pretty bad luck involved too. So he's definitely one to watch. Couple offensive performances. Have to talk about Eric Batanti, another 2023 draft pick. He moved up to low A last week, as we talked about, but this week he went absolutely crazy. He hit 5 homers. He had a slugging percentage of 1,000 this week, in the past week, I should say. And one of those 5 homers left the bat at 111 miles per hour. He is 18 years old. He will be until November. He has some of the biggest power I've seen in the Brewers' entire organization, especially at that age. I got to go back to like Prince Fielder to have any sort of comp for what he's showing in terms of power. And I think there's more in the tank. He is 18 years old. Like, I think the exit velos will continue to go up. There's still some swing and miss issues. There's concerns here, but the raw power potential for Batanti is insane. Like, if there's a Brewers prospect who might hit 40, it's probably him. Mike Bovey, a guy who I've always believed has pop, but he hasn't shown it a ton. He's hit 3 homers in his first 3 games off of the IL. He went 9 for 20 in that stretch. Like I said, I think he has pop. He hit a ball 112 miles per hour for a homer in the Arizona Complex League last year after being drafted. So we know he's capable of impacting the ball. HC Purdy asked, Mike Bovey seems to be a pretty advanced hitter. How soon do you think we could see him in Milwaukee? Also, does he have a defensive position at the MLB level? I guess I could see next year at some point, but I would guess we're looking at more of a 2026 debut, mostly because of that defensive position. I think he can handle third. I think he could handle second in a pinch. First base is probably his best defensive position, but I do think third would be fine for him. It is going to be kind of a tough squeeze in terms of looking ahead at the MLB roster and figuring out where he fits, but I think he can handle both corners fine. And like I said, he could play second base like at the level Travis Shaw played second base, probably. That wouldn't shock me. And then a couple DSL updates, and we had a question on these two guys too. So Jesus Mate went 3 for 5 with a double and a triple today. Just continues to absolutely mash. He also stole 2 bases, brought his season line up to 351, 467 on base, 570 slug for a 1037 OPS. And he brought his stolen base total up to 24 out of 27. And Luis Pena went 2 for 4 with a double, 2 walks, 5 RBIs, 1 stolen base today. He brought his season line to 401 batting average, 466, 599 slug, 1065 OPS, and he is now 37 of 41 on stolen bases. So Patrick asked, it's tougher to put much stock into DSL numbers, but is the hype around Jesus Mate and Luis Pena real enough to put them in some top 100/200 prospect lists? Mate seems to be the one that will get more helium with his strong plate discipline, plus power, and high exit velos. So that Just Baseball list that I talked about earlier had Mate at 56 on it today. So the hype for me is very real with these two, not just because of the counting stats, which are among the best. Well, I think they are the 2 best seasons anybody's ever had for the DSL Brewers. But especially for Mate, because of the things you listed, Patrick, it's very good plate discipline. He's walking more than he's striking out. He's not whiffing hardly at all. The Brewers have posted some of his contact rates, which are around 90%. And then he is showing exit velos of up to 109 as a 17-year-old. Like, if you're dreaming on any prospect to be the next Jackson Chourio, I'm not saying he will be, but if there's anyone who could be, it's Jesus Mate. And there is huge, huge potential. And he's a switch hitter too. He hasn't had to hit righty very often because there aren't that many lefty pitchers in the DSL, but he is a switch hitter. So there's just a ton to be excited about with him, and Pena too. Like, Pena, just the only difference for him really is not quite as much exit velo right now. and he's more of a free swinger. Great bat to ball skills, but probably not as good of swing decisions. So that'll wrap up the minor league portion, other than there have been a couple of injuries to a couple of young arms in Carolina. Eniel Cortez and Manuel Rodriguez both went on the 7-day IL. Both are 18 years old pitching. Well, I shouldn't say. Rodriguez turned 19 today, but they were 18-year-olds pitching in the Carolina League and both doing relatively well for their age, especially Rodriguez. So unfortunate to see that happen. Hopefully it's nothing major. But yeah, that wraps up the minor league portion. And Jack, what do we got for major league injury updates?
All of our major league injury updates for this week are pitchers, because those seem to be the only people who suffer major injuries on this roster. We'll start with Trevor McGill. As a reminder, he went on the IL with some lower back discomfort after Devin Williams returned. He started throwing again pretty quickly. Sounds like he is going to be back in game action next week, whether that's with the Brewers or with Nashville first for a couple of rehab appearances. That's still TBD, but sounds like everything is progressing how they hoped with him. DL Hall, who we touched on earlier, he made another rehab start on Tuesday night, held his velocity through 4 innings. We were still seeing 96s toward the back end of that outing. So it sounds like the Brewers are about to make a decision with him. Probably still a question yet whether he comes back as a starter or out of the bullpen or in kind of a hybrid role like we talked about. But it sounds like, barring, DL Hall getting struck by lightning or something, the never-ending rehab assignment is almost over. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. DL Hall could be returning to the Brewers roster in a few days here. Another lefty, Brian Hudson, he's made a pair of rehab appearances with Nashville. He went multiple innings in his second one on Wednesday night. Sounds like his next outing could potentially be in Milwaukee. Again, another guy who they were thinking about a minimum IL stint. Sounds like that is probably going to be the case. I did look at how this second rehab outing went for him. The velo's not quite back to where it was before. He was still down to 88 on one of his fastballs. He did get up to 93, but still kind of a wide spectrum there. And the average, I think, was still a tick below what it's been in the big leagues this year. So I wouldn't be opposed to one more just to see that that's fully back, but we'll see what the plan is for him. Minor league guru, were you seeing the same things? Did you pay attention to his rehab outing?
I did. I will say, I think the lowest fastball he threw was mistagged. I think it was a cutter. Okay. So that may have been part of it, but I may be thinking they may have fixed it too before it, but I saw it in game. I was paying attention to it, and I was almost certain it was a cutter when he threw it, and then it looked more like a cutter, and then it was his lowest one. So I think that might have been what happened there.
Okay, yeah, up to 93 and up to 88 with a cutter, that would make sense. Or up to 93 with the four-seamer, up to 88 with a cutter. So hopefully that's the case. But either way, he should be back soon. Inoli Paredes is hoping to be ready for a rehab assignment next weekend. So not the weekend that you're potentially listening to this, the weekend after. He has progressed well with the catch play, so sounds like he's ready to get back into game action. And then JB Bukauskas, he's pitched 3 times in Nashville. No word yet on how long that assignment's going to be, but he's a few outings in. Seems like everything is checking out for him so far. So he's still an option for the bullpen down the stretch. A guy who I really, really liked as someone who could have been a high leverage arm for them this year. I love that sinker and slider combo. Unfortunate that he hasn't gotten more of an opportunity, but he could be back in the near future as well. So we'll wrap up this week by previewing the Brewers' next series with the Reds. Milwaukee is coming home for their longest homestand of the year, 10 games at American Family Field in 10 days. I will be there for all 10 of them. This will be a long week. Hopefully it's a fun week, though. We'll break down the pitching matchups that we have for this first series against the division rival Reds. Aaron Savali is going to start game 1 for the Brewers opposite Gabe Spires. That game will start at 7:10 on Friday night. It's an Apple TV game for the second Friday in a row. So the only way that you'll be able to watch that game is if you have a subscription to Apple TV Plus, or if you created your 85th email to get another free trial of Apple TV Plus. Saturday, it's going to be Tobias Myers opposite Nick Martinez. Nick Martinez, who I had as a Brewers pitching target over the offseason. Still wish that they would have signed him. I think he would have been a really, really good fit for this run prevention unit, but he's with the division rival Reds instead, having a pretty nice year in kind of that hybrid role that he's occupied over the last couple of years. That'll be a 6:10 first pitch. Sunday, the Brewers have not announced their starter for that game, but it will be left-hander Nick Lodolo starting. That'll be a 1:10 getaway day for the Reds. Nick Lodolo, he pitched against the Brewers a couple times. I don't know if he threw against them last year, but the year before for sure, because he was hurt for a lot of last year. But the year before for sure, really impressive stuff from him in those outings. So I think that's a guy who doesn't get a lot of name recognition, but I think Brewer fans should be prepared for him because he's got pretty good stuff. That's a tough matchup, even if it's a guy that not a lot of people know about. But we'll see how that series goes for the Brewers. We'll be back with you to break down that and more. The Brewers are going to play the Dodgers after the Reds as well on this homestand, so we should have a lot to go over. Spencer, you will most likely not be with us because you are skirting your responsibilities as co-host.
Yep.
So we may have to go to a backup plan. Stay tuned. We may have a
Go to
guest.
the bullpen.
Yeah, go to the bullpen. We may have a guest analyst taking Spencer's spot in that episode, but we'll know for sure next week. We still hope you'll tune in, though, even though we don't have my wonderful co-host on tap for that game. So Spencer will talk to you all in 2 weeks, but I will be back with you at this same time next Friday. Until then, go Brewers.